אפשר להשם צדיקים יבואו גבול זה.
לא על הלחם לבדו יחיה האדם, כי על כל מוצא פי Hashem יחיה האדם. A man does not live by bread alone, but on everything that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Dvarim 8:3. The phrase is familiar to many people, even those with no knowledge of the Torah. This famous quote became one of the core theological ideas of Western civilization when it was popularized through Christianity. It is so strongly associated with Christianity that even Jews don't know that it comes from the book of Dvarim. This is an example of a text that has a profound influence on our culture, yet people don't know that it's Jewish. It is the words of Moshe addressed to us. So what associations do you have when you hear the verse, "A man does not live by bread alone"? Many of us, I suppose, would probably agree that the underlying meaning of the verse is that people need to satisfy their basic physical needs to eat food, but also have spiritual needs. Rabbi Joseph Hertz explains it this way: physical food is not the only thing that ensures human existence. Apart from the normal sustenance, there are divine forces which sustain human beings and their progress through life. This is a beautiful and inspiring reading, but there is more to it. This quote has a lot of history, interpretations, and meanings attached to it. And if we put it in context, the message of these words is considerably more complicated than what we might have thought. The entire verse goes like this: remember the long way that your God has made you travel in the wilderness this past 40 years in order to test you by hardships, to learn what was in your heart, whether you would keep the divine commandments or not. God subjected you to the hardships of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known, in order to teach you that a human being does not live on bread alone, but that only may live on anything that comes from the mouth of the Lord. In its direct meaning, the verse is not talking about physical versus the spiritual. It talks about God testing Israelites. When people ran out of the bread that they brought from Egypt, matzah, God sent the miraculous food that comes from heavens. Rabbi Mark Zilbershtein comments, the purpose of the test was to see whether the people would follow God's instruction by eating the strange food from the sky, and thereby learn that they could satisfy their hunger and survive in a novel manner. That is the meaning of the verse in context. You don't need bread. You can survive physically on something else. That's very different from what we previously mentioned. It's about trusting God rather than mundane versus spiritual. This time God give you manna, next time God may choose something else to support you. It reminds us about our limited abilities, while God's power is unlimited. Hence, this parsha repeats multiple times the following idea: don't say to yourself, my own power and the might of my own head have won this wealth for me. Remember that it is your God who gives you the power to get wealth and fulfillment of the covenant made on us with your fathers, as it is still the case. It is a really humbling reminder and a warning. Moshe speaks to the Israelites on the doorsteps of Promised Land. He says, when you enter this land and will live there in comfort and prosperity, don't forget the miracles that happened to you in the wilderness, and that only by those miracles you got to your wealth. The warning gets even sharper. Not only should you remember that God made you prosperous, but also that you did not do anything to deserve it. These words sound rather harsh. Say not to yourself, God has enabled us to possess this land because of our virtues. Know that it's not for any of virtues of yours that God is giving you this good land to possess. For you are a stiff-necked people. Remember, never forget how you provoked your God to anger in the wilderness from the day that you left land of Egypt until you reached this place. And this is Dvarim 10, verses 4-7. Moshe then proceeds to remind everyone about the sin of golden calf, the symbol of wealth and idolatry. And remember that when he's speaking to his audience, he's not speaking to people who actually built the golden calf, because that generation has passed away already. He is talking to people who did not participate in those events. These rebukes are addressed to the reader. You do not deserve the blessing of God. He does that because he loved your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, who, unlike you, never complained despite all difficulties in their lives. It might sound discouraging, but our commentators of blessed memory don't stop here. Yaakov ben Asher, aka Baal HaTurim, 13th century Spanish rabbi, writes that though our ancestors observed all commandments of God and followed his paths, they were not given food from the heavens. They had to cultivate the land and raise cattle. Moshe wants to tell the people to appreciate the extent of God's loving kindness, who despite all misbehavior of the Israelites still fed them with manna. Soon they're going to enter the promised land, and the miracle of manna will stop. Now it will be the job of each person to cultivate the soil of the Holy Land and to work by the sweat on one's brow to put food on the table. If we read the message this way, it's not a rebuke anymore. Instead, God tells people, when you enter the land, you will not receive miraculous food anymore, but I will not abandon you. It doesn't matter that you rebelled all the time. I will still take care of you. You don't need to do anything to deserve it. I will do it because of my love for you, which is unconditional. These two readings might seem to contradict one another. Either God is demanding trust and obedience, or showing the never-ending love. Rabbi Eli Munk notices that in the tractate Yoma of the Babylonian Talmud, page 74b, sages use our verse to establish the principle that there is a fundamental difference between the outlook of wealthy people and poor people. In Talmud it said, there is no comparison between one who has bread in his basket and one who does not have bread in his basket. For a wealthy person, the message, a human doesn't live by bread alone, might read as, don't forget where your success and comfort came from. Be humble. Don't praise yourself without necessity, because ultimately everything comes from God. For a poor person, the same verse might be a reminder that God still loves and cares for them. It might mean, as I loved you and ancestors who faced a lot of troubles and challenges, I love you. I will not abandon you. We might put ourselves in one of these categories or somewhere in between. We might need a reminder that there is more to this life than the satisfaction of material needs. We might find comfort in remembering that we do not have full control of our lives and not everything depends on us. You might hear a message that I don't hear at all because our life situations are drastically different. But hopefully, the words of the Torah reach our hearts with the message that speaks to us here and now. And may our hearts and minds always be open to the message of the Torah, which comes from the mouth of the Lord. And let us say, Amen.